On today's podcast, we have as our guest music supervisor Margaret Saadi Kramer. Had a great conversation with her. You're going to hear all about the role of the music supervisor, how they're chosen, what their job actually is. We talked a lot about how streaming has changed the whole nature of sourcing music in projects today. We talked about how music is driving so many more stories than before. We also got into how do you get on her radar or any music supervisor's radar for your music if you're looking to place your music into film or television. Insiders, are you ready? Welcome to MUBUTV's Insider Podcast, where our mission is to educate, empower, and engage artists and music business professionals who are dedicated to having a successful career in the new music industry. Here are your hosts, Ritch, Esra, and Eric Knight.
Welcome back, Insiders, to another episode of the MUBUTV Insider Podcast, where our mission is to educate, empower, and engage your music career. On today's episode, we sat down with music supervisor Margaret Saadi Kramer to take a deep dive into the world of music supervision, including how music is used more today to drive stories than in the past, the role streaming has played in sourcing new music today for various projects, the best way to get on her radar, and much, much more. You won't want to miss it. But first, a word from our sponsor. Hey Insiders, are you looking to take your music career to the next level? Then you need to know about the Music Business Registry. The Music Business Registry is the leading music industry publisher of the most up-to-date contact information for major and independent record label A&R, music publishers, artist managers, music attorneys, music supervisors, and much, much more. The Music Business Registry is the trusted industry standard and source serving the music business community for over 28 years with the most accurate and up-to-date contact information available. Their titles include the A&R Registry, the Film and Television Music Monthly, the Music Publisher Registry, and the Music Attorney Registry. All of their publications are available in print, PDF, CSV, or online subscription. Visit them now at musicregistry.com and receive a 10% discount by using coupon code MUBUTV10 at checkout. That's musicregistry.com, coupon code MUBUTV10. When you're ready to put your music to work, musicregistry.com.
Welcome back, Insiders. Today's featured interview is with music supervisor and music publisher Margaret Saadi Kramer. We had a very interesting discussion with her with regards to how music supervisors are chosen, how she sources new music for her projects in today's world, the role that streaming has in her work, as well as working as an independent publisher in 2020. She had a lot of very, very interesting, thoughts, ideas, and perspectives on that particular world, and particularly in building a company from the ground up.
Yeah, I thought it was a very interesting interview and talking about how she, how her music supervisors chosen for the films and the projects, and at what point, in the process do you start thinking about the role music will have in the production, which I thought was interesting. And I guess you touched on this point earlier, where has streaming helped, her source music for her projects, which was an interesting, response that she had. So I think this is a really, really great, insightful interview.
Yeah, she had a lot of very, very interesting things to say above and beyond just music supervision,
right,
but also around music publishing and around building, her catalog of writers and who she works with and how all of that integrates into her music supervision as well as music publishing. So it had a different spin than just, some of the supervisors that we've spoken with who don't do that. So that's why I think it's more of an interesting conversation.
Absolutely. With that, Insiders, sit back, relax, and enjoy our featured interview with Margaret Saadi Kramer.
Margaret, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure to be here. Thanks for asking.
I always like to start by asking our guests, at what point in your life did you know that music or the music industry was going to be your professional career path?
Well, I probably didn't realize it as a professional career path until, I'm going to say, graduate school, until my early 20s, because I had been writing. My degrees are in English Lit, and I really thought that I would have a traditional career in, journalism or newspaper editing and magazine work that I had already been doing in Ohio. So I thought that music would always be like a side hustle, and then rock and roll saved my life.
That's great.
As it's done with all of us.
Yes.
Margaret, this is Eric. Thank you so much for joining us. How are music supervisors chosen for a film? Is it the director, producer, or studio production company that makes that decision?
Well, film specific, it's run the gamut for me. Oftentimes the less experienced directors perceive the music as an add-on. It's something to do at the end when the principal photography and all the material parts of the film that are perceived as vital are locked in place. But as you move along and you get more experience, you realize how much of a character the music is unto itself in a film. And so the more experienced directors and producers start even earlier in the process. So my work as a music supervisor has run the gamut. I've been hired by directors. I've been engaged by writers in early days and by producers, and actually have gotten supervision work because I've either represented or recommended composers because of my work as a music publisher for so many decades. So sometimes it's through that side door of, oh, this person really knows a lot about score or knows which composers thrive in certain environments, and then all of a sudden you get asked to supervise.
Is supervision different or has a different path or criteria in television or in other mediums?
Well, I think it used to be a greater divide. The first bit of work I did was about 15 years ago for a dear friend of ours who created essentially the tween genre. He was a man named Tommy Lynch, and he has a company called Tom Lynch Company, and they created and sort of built the template for that tween environment. And he was creating a series that starred the very first teenage female homosexual character who was coming to know herself as she was emerging to her family. And it was GLAAD Award nominated, and he knew he had a special story, and he wanted someone that would understand it both culturally and politically. So that work that had some gravitas to it, I think, connected Tommy and me through some of the composer work that was being done. And it's certainly changed in the last 15 years. And I would say the difference is that there is so much more heavy television programming that the line is now blurred. We used to be just TV music soups, and then they were just film music soups, and now you're just a creative advisor for anything that needs music on any tier or any layer of sort of musical texture. So sure, I think it's changed, and I think the differences used to be greater.
It's an interesting answer because it sort of leads me to asking you then, in your experience, Margaret, is music used more today to drive stories than in the past?
Well, I think that that's a tough question. It really depends on how strong the story is. And there have been many times where I've taken jobs with the distinct understanding that maybe the narrative wasn't as deep or as effective as it needed to be. And sometimes there's this perception that music is going to save it or elevate it. And it certainly always will elevate it, but will also always make it worse if bad choices are made. So, when we started out 20 years ago, and especially in the world of the alternative world coming from the world of punk rock, essentially, and college radio, the utilization of music for more than it just for music's sole purpose was really frowned on, and now it's a vital part of the equation in driving anything. It started with commercials and it's exploded. But it's a funny thing. The creative used to drive the commercial, and now it's distribution methods that are opening the jobs up wide. It's cracked the world open because we receive music and we receive story in all of its formats so different than we did when I was in my 20s. And so I would say it's way easier to convince an artist, or you don't have to push water uphill with respect to that conversation about why it's important to allow your music to be used in a certain format. And the other thing is I believe that artists are better informed now than they used to be about how important that is in bringing their art to the world. It's no secret that you'd buy the record and everything else in the record's orbit was ancillary, and now we give the record away and we talk about all the other verticals that are going on around the release of the songs, which, you used to think, well, this is such a bad thing. Like, what is the music a footnote? But I don't think Lizzo was in any way harmed by that, nor was Lady Gaga. So it's a cool time.
Yeah, it's interesting listening to you because, you're speaking exactly to a philosophy that I very, very much believe and that I also preach to my students constantly, which is that in the era that we live in today, and you've said it just now, is that it's the most important commodity in marketing music today is not power, it's not money, it's not market share, it's the ability to get people's attention. And all of these platforms provide that ability rather than just radio or just MTV or just the narrow confines of press as it used to be prior to the internet. It's a whole different world today, and it has changed the values around how, as you pointed out, around how artists perceive the usage of their music to get it to an audience.
No question. And, my work as a manager has really informed my work as a supervisor and as a publisher. I've worked as a manager. It was the first thing I did. I moved to Los Angeles to manage, and then about a year later moved into the role of publisher, really by the virtue of need. And that's driven everything I've done. An artist needs something, you figure it out. An artist needs something, you figure it out. And then all of a sudden you're educated in almost every part of the world where income streams are vital to keep a working artist working. So my music supervision work is no longer half of my business. When my son came 6 years ago, I had to make some decisions about what it meant to be a full-time mom while still being a full-time business owner. And I also happen to be married to my client. So the music work is the family business, and it's a small business, but it's a fierce one. And just experiencing 2018 the way Wayne and I did was a release of a memoir at a major publisher, timing that with a tour of the world of the 50th anniversary of Kick Out the Jams for that Elektra record that Wayne did as basically a senior in high school, along with every other repackaged project that we've put together, the record we did with Third Man that's coming out in 2020, and the box set I did with Jason Reynolds when he was at Rhino of the three MC5 titles from the Elektra Atlantic era, which are now Rhino records we did with Mark Pincus. So the idea that you get to do one thing and you get to compartmentalize is really Pollyannish, and I implore everyone to have big ears and expand their minds to the potential, because I saw what happened when a #1 rock and roll memoir on Amazon was co-marketed with a world tour, with the help of a team. But still, we are very small, and we did exactly what we wanted to do. And 2018 looked the way it needed to look because of a lot of elbow grease, but also a lot of open-mindedness in the performers and in the people that were our marketing partners.
Margaret, I wanted to ask you, for our listeners that would be really interested to know, when you're working on a project, can you take us through what a typical day looks like for you?
Sure. Do you mean when we're talking about like a documentary film where supervising it and Wayne is scoring it, or because oftentimes we work as a team. He'll be the composer of record and I'll be the supervisor. And there's a lot of back and forth.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure no day is the same, but I'm just curious as what a typical day would look like.
Well, it starts really early. And we have had the floor of a building here in West Hollywood for about 17 years. And not only do I run the music publishing business for the MC5 world through here, but I also Wayne's production studio where he scores just about everything is across the hall. And we also, under the same roof, run my music catalog business, which is motion picture advertising and television promos. So it starts early, and we basically meet as a catalog and talk about the goals and work backward on the release schedule and prepare that. So simultaneous to the people who work with me here in Teragram Music, setting up release schedules for 3 to 4 months lead, and hiring composers will then either spot part of a film and begin the score and some temp, or we'll talk about tours and set those up and start hiring. So there's about 8 plates spinning on any 10-hour day here.
Wow. That's amazing.
Margaret, as a music supervisor, at what point in the process do you start to think about the role music's going to have in your production, from choice of composer to possible song selections?
Well, we start as early as we can. If the writer, director, producer, fill in the blank has the forethought to come to us early, then we start immediately. I can give you an example now if that you find that will be helpful. We've just taken a job on a film called Freak Power, which is a prequel to Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. And the entire temp score is something unclearable. It is a body of work from a band that was of the period when Hunter S. Thompson was running for sheriff in Aspen. And it just predates his time getting the work at Rolling Stone and then becoming really an indelible part of the sort of revolutionary publishing that happened during the early 70s era. And what we're doing right now is not just trying to replace the licensed music with temp that makes sense and has an impact on the narrative, but also we found that we could really tell a story that has weight if the composing is a story in and of itself. So what we did propose to the director and the producers is, why don't we score this film live to picture and do it in a way that when we select the composers who to play with our composer of record, they are also themselves notorious for their work. And so we picked musicians who are kindred to the subject matter of the story and also who lived through that time and can capture what's going on in the temp score in a new and sort of enlightened way. So we're going to create an entire project based on the score itself, film the scoring, and all the players will be recognizable to everyone listening. And then we will release the live score or a variation of whatever happens in the room, depending on how uninterrupted the score is, and we'll create something that we bundle with the film itself. So it sort of deepens the story of the film, and it recontextualizes the players playing to the story that they lived through. So there's creative ways to make it really interesting, and they're no more expensive than hiring a composer to do either a score in the box with a bit of live score added, or to just do something hybrid that doesn't have as much of the feel and the grit and the swing of live players in a room. And this film, you'll need that. So if you start early enough, you can really do it right. And you need a little bit of a budget to spend, and that's often the hurdle, because music cannot be an afterthought in the process of filmmaking. It's got to be its own line item. It's got to be done correctly.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're robbing Peter to pay Paul, and nobody wins, and nobody ends up caring in the end.
Exactly.
Margaret, in a case where you have a director or producer of a film or TV show who is intent on using a piece of music where you think it really doesn't work, how do you push back against that?
First, you tell the truth, and you do it in the most respectful way you can. And the way I've found it works is I come into the conversation with viable alternates that respect what the director's trying to do with the temp that is absolutely unclearable or makes no sense in the context. And, what I've found works the best is, and thank goodness people here in my office help me with this, because I am not Final Cut Pro or Logic savvy, but I know how to ask for help. But what I'll do is I'll take 3 or 4 viable alternates, and I'll actually tempt them to the scene and then bounce them out and show them to the director.
That's great.
So that they see that you've really thought it through and you're not just trying to make your bones on your choice.
Right.
Directors have really good instincts. They generally are not directors because they know nothing. They're directors because they come in with a pretty well-rounded vision, and someone's giving them hundreds of thousands to millions of dollars to fulfill that. So, you really, what you realize very quickly is you're serving the body of the story itself. It's really ultimately not about you. You've got to be in love with the mosaic art form and be in love with collaboration. And there's a little ego because everybody loves what they love. Right. And, what we love, I found the thing that all of music supervisors have in common is we want that discovery, and we want to say, I've been sitting on this for 10 years. I'm so excited this finally happened. And there has been an occasion for me a couple of times where I'm just beside myself, happy that things have gone to finish that oftentimes the editor or the director never even knew existed because of where I grew up or the weird stuff I'm into. And so, you've opened some minds, and you've made something go to finish that enhances the story in a way that they never could have imagined. And so that's exciting for me.
Hey, Insiders, we hope that you've been enjoying our featured interview. Stay tuned because we've got so much more value coming your way. But before we dive back in, a word from our sponsor. Hey, Ritch, you're the founder, CEO, legend of Music Business Registry. Tell us what the Music Business Registry is all about.
Well, what it's about, Eric, is it's a company that is designed to provide the most accurate and up-to-date contact information for the music business. So if someone is looking to reach the A&R community, if someone is looking to reach music publishers, if someone needs to reach artist managers, if someone needs to reach music attorneys, if someone's looking to place their music into film and television and needs to reach all the music supervisors, that's the contact information that we provide. We've been doing it for 28 years. We're sort of the industry standard, if you will, for the music business and have been serving them since 1992. So that's what we do.
Amazing. So if I wanted to find out, let's say A&R people from Warner Brothers, let's say, I can just go in there and find that in the A&R registry?
Absolutely. You'll find all of the Warner Brothers in there. You'll find the Warner Brothers in LA, Warner Brothers in New York, Warner Brothers in Nashville, Warner Brothers in London, Warner Brothers, probably in Australia as well. So those are the main territories that we cover.
Amazing. And we're offering all of our insiders right now that are listening, if you visit musicregistry.com and use coupon code MUBUTV10 at checkout, you'll get a 10% discount off your first order. That's musicregistry.com, coupon code MUBUTV10. Anything else you want to say, Ritch?
Well, when you're ready to put your music to work, musicregistry.com. It's an interesting segue into my next question because you sort of touched upon a lot of areas that I want to expand with you on, which is, do you find that today, Margaret, as opposed to when you started in the field of music supervision, that films, motion picture directors, television shows are open to a far greater diversity of musical choices for their projects than they were in the past?
Well, I have always found that it's dependent on the person. A lot of times age has to do with that. And now that a bit more seasoned, I would say that a lot of the younger producers who are extremely hardworking, but who aren't that interested in getting the uniform dirty with respect to digging into archives that can educate them. A lot of the producers and directors now are relying on you to do what you did on the project they saw that they hired you from. For example, a good bit of the work I've gotten in the last 6 or 7 years is a result of the Eastbound and Down work I did in 3 seasons for HBO. And it is so hard. There is nothing in the universe on TV right now that is apples to apples for Eastbound and Down, and I don't think there ever will be. It was an animal unto itself. And so I can say to someone who's thinking about hiring me as a supervisor and interested in my playlist, I can say, yes, I was responsible for that placement, and yes, I ran the budget. But the truth is, the Eastbound and Down was its own thing to the point where I think in 20 years it's probably going to age even funnier and weirder than it's revered now. And so we really do have to make sure that you have day-to-day communication with whoever your boss is on the project, because they're going to like working with you more if you see their project for what it is, not as for a comparison to a job you just left. Right. That was crazy successful, or nothing is ever a hit because of its music, unless it's a 30-second commercial possibly that no one would have ever seen had they not been a fan of Iggy and the Stooges' Search and Destroy or something.
Right.
Margaret, in music supervision, it seems that you're often serving two masters, the film or TV show and the studio who hired you. How do you balance that situation?
Well, the studio or the network who's hiring you is often very preoccupied with you not overspending. So sometimes the conflict will occur between your director wanting something no matter the price, and then your phone rings the next day as you've uploaded your music quotes and, what you're thinking about clearing, and you're getting a call from the network going, "What are you doing?" And your answer is, "I'm doing what my boss asked me to do." So, how do you handle it? You do your best to the letter, to the penny, never ever go over budget, which I'm happy I have to say I've never done. But, most of my experience on the music supervision side, on the studio marketing department, commitments have been just that, really, with advertising. So, I've found that if you have the ability to pull from a variety of competent composers, or your relationship with the publishers and the labels remains strong, what I found is it's mostly about ongoing work. Like, if you do what you say you're going to do, for the most part, it will work out, because people want to continue to be in business. So, I'm often asked, what's my definition of success? And I say it's being able to continue. And I know Wayne applies the same answer when asked that. And I believe that is almost everyone's. If you can't give a publisher what they need on a placement for a budget, and it's obvious you're not holding back, they're generally going to try to work with you because there's more business coming and your intentions are good. So it's a tough situation to be in, because sometimes your director will go rogue, or an editor will hire a friend they went to college with who's got a band, and then the inevitable happens. That is, well, I talked to them and they said they'll clear it at this price, and what they neglected to mention is they neither control their sound recording nor their composition, right? So you learn as you go.
Okay. You know, I look at the market today, and I look at, a lot of the answers that you've been talking about. You have obviously a tremendous depth of knowledge of songs, of sources of music. And I'm curious, Margaret, with so many outlets and choices for music today, and more entering the market in the last 5 or 6 years, and more on a regular basis even today, how do you source new music to be used in your various projects?
Well, it's a two-pronged answer. The first being as a catalog owner of a production music catalog. When I started 22 years ago and approached the networks about taking us on as a vendor at the networks, one of the heads of the promo departments told me, we've got 40 other catalogs, and, I think we're going to do this because you sound like you know what you're doing. And then 10 years later, of course, I've been friends with that person, and she's been there 10 years of experience worth of dealing with catalogs, and we're at lunch, and the short answer is that number of 40 catalogs, competition has gone to 400. So a very, very important question, how much of that content coming at us is worthwhile? So as a catalog owner, what I've done is I've kind of circled the wagons. I've based every single decision with respect to what I commission and what we perceive as a viable composer partner or a label partner as referred to me. So I either am doing business with composers who I have done work with before, whose work is just, melodically incredible, or their work ethic is dependable. And that alone has allowed me to expand the composer pool. So we're able to provide custom score in a way that we wouldn't have been before, because the world of me being a representative of music catalog rather than an owner of music catalog meant that I couldn't really go outside the inner sanctum of creators of those whose work I repped. And now as an owner, I can do business with anyone I want. So that is a real freeing experience for me after 20 years of representing a hugely successful trailer music catalog from inception. So that's part one. Creating content for your own catalog is based almost completely for me on one-on-one experience and one composer recommending another composer. For example, I in Wayne's band on the Lexington album, we hired a man named Joe Barry. Joe Barry is a multi-instrumentalist, and we've worked with Joe over 10 years. All of a sudden, Joe is a member of M83. He's touring. He's in this wildly successful world. But the way I know Joe is through a score experience that was done here with Wayne for a film called COG, which was the first ever David Sedaris adapted feature film that was allowed. And Joe scored the film with Wayne's help using only live sounds from his body, found sounds. He would literally play his throat and pieces of objects, and it was very Philip Glassy, but with an rhythmic overtone. So that experience was logged in my mind. And when I went and found out that Joe was in M83, but he had created this other catalog, we just watered that and planted that seed. And now Joe is a regular composer at Teragram. So content-wise, there's that. Finding songs for sync is, I'm drowning in a sea of content. And so what I realized about right about 2016 was that my email address was a commodity, which was really frustrating because I would start getting pitched literally everything. I mean, if you had a Casio in your basement and you had a 4-track or GarageBand, you got yourself a catalog and somebody found me, right? So what I did was I decided that I was going to have to start a campaign of unsubscribe so I could filter through what had already been downloaded. And I came to the conclusion that if you're an artist or you're a label and you are trying to find someone to rep, 100 albums for you, you really need to make the decision that you're going to marry a single representative. Because if I get 4 pitches of the same album from 4 different independent reps, they're all going in the circular file. I don't know who I'm licensing from.
Right.
I don't know what's what. That means you don't know what's what. So, we've sort of enlisted that philosophy. And trust me, there's plenty of music just with those one-on-ones. So if there is a message to be had to your listeners who are looking to have their songs placed reputably, the direction is find someone who's doing it right, who's doing it ethically, who you can relate to both from a music business conversation and they get what you're making. Do it and give them the responsibility to sell you to people like me, because repetition is not clarification. It's too much is too much.
Absolutely. Has streaming helped in your ability to source new music more efficiently and effectively for your projects?
Not for me. That could be an age issue because I find what I want and then let it in. But I must say that the people in their 20s who work for me every day, and there are half dozen of them, streaming is their life. And I'm starting to practice it a bit more just for fun, but so much of my work involves writing, and I have found it very difficult to write with music on. So I don't get to listen to music for fun as much as I used to. So I've been isolating myself just to discover new music. And I'm getting a lot of it through the 26 and 27-year-olds in my world, and simultaneously getting a lot of weird jazz recommendations that are way past Sun Ra and way past Albert Eiler from the older people I work with, really seasoned composers who are sort of beyond the beat and beyond the key, and who are just way, way out when they're listening to music for fun. So I'm kind of getting it from the older dudes and the younger dudes and gals. So it's really cool, actually. I'm kind of sandwiched in this world of try this, try this, try this. Okay.
Let me ask you then, what's the best way for an independent artist or songwriter or, company to reach you or to learn what your musical needs are and get on your radar? I mean, is it direct? Is it with your people? Or do you prefer that they go through a third party, like, a composer you're working with, or through a library of some kind that you have a relationship with? What is your personal preference at your company?
Well, what I find doesn't work with me is sending an email that I can't unsubscribe from, because I immediately go like, okay, but what if I didn't want that? So I've found that the best approach is to communicate with people we're already communicating with. But that's the oldest story in the book, isn't it? That's like, God, don't tell me that. Like, what if I don't know anybody who knows you,
Right.
and I've got this incredible record? So that's a tough one. There is so much volume. And I would say that what is interesting is we have become very lazy viewers. So if I only hear something, I might already know it because someone's turned me on to it. But if I hear and see something in social media and that audiovisual component is there, I'm more likely to stick with it longer. So, I think that says it doesn't mean that you have to have a video made for your song. Of course, that's very 80s. But who doesn't get excited by what they see in 60 seconds in social media? Get as much from Instagram and Facebook, and not so much Twitter for the creative, but really Instagram and Facebook for the visual tied to the audio. And we do so much work at YouTube with ad rev and have really experienced a lot of rogue ideas when our cues have been stolen, synced to homemade trailers or homemade fan videos, and then the way we've discovered the interesting mashups or interesting songs that are sort of synced before and after the stuff that's been stolen is because of AdRev catching that audio in the net and it redirecting to us. And we're looking at what are people actually doing? What are they taking and what are they ripping that they found without us promoting at all? And that's the real fun of it, because that's the fan-driven work. Whether they're Star Wars fans or they're garage rock fans. I mean, I've been really lucky over the course of 25 years because I'm so into the world, the underground world, and that sort of pioneering hard rock world, but also at the same amount of time I've been in theatrical marketing. So it's so fun to see old songs being reimagined, and we're doing a bit of that ourselves now, where, this very classic, boys rock balls to the wall tune is done by a little breathy female vocalist who's turned the arrangement up on its head, and you go, yeah, this is, of course, we're tired of the thing we've been hearing for 40 years. This is great. It's reimagined. So those are inspired discoveries, and YouTube's good for that.
Absolutely. What's the most challenging aspect of your job today?
The most challenging aspect, I would say, is filtering through the volume and not feeling bad about missing things. 10 years ago, I literally downloaded everything, put it onto a shuttle drive, because I felt a responsibility to do that. And then I got over it because I realized I can't, it's not humanly possible, because there is just too much out there. So I think filtering through the mud is a real challenge, but inside it, there are these unpolished gems. And there's so much cool, innovative music out there being made by people of all ages, men and women, kids, seniors. The internet has leveled the playing field for what you can make and how you can deliver it. And I think it's absolute genius. So that's part one. Part two is we really cannot keep up with paperwork. So there's so much litigation, and that's concerning in that a lot of these decisions that are happening now, and this is a conversation for another day, and we won't get into a lot of why that's wrong, but from Blurred Lines all the way through what just happened with Katy Perry to a few others, right, it makes me realize that there is a distinct lack of understanding of copyright and artist protections, and believe much of what's happening in the courts now is going to be, the pendulum's going to swing back, because there's been a real chilling effect on creativity in some of these judgments. And most of them, the judgments are happening because of just pure ignorance on the part of the judges and juries. So that's intriguing to me, but that's not why we're here today.
Yeah, no, it's interesting hearing your answer about that, because it's something that, ever since the Blurred Lines case, I am versed in publishing and in copyright somewhat, in that I teach, courses on this stuff, and I could not agree with you more. And as you know, Margaret, a lot of people, maybe not everybody, but a lot of people in the publishing and songwriting community agree with you as well. It's as if, we're in a certain field, we're in electricity, but our, creative judgments and cases are being decided by people who work in an automotive industry. It's being, those decisions that have to be lived by and litigated are being made by people who don't necessarily understand the laws of copyright and the rules of copyright as they were written, and they don't apply them in the same way, which is really, really frustrating. The Blurred Lines case to me was especially egregious. What made it distinct was that it wasn't some artist or some songwriter who had no notoriety coming out of left field to say, you stole my song when I sent my demo to you. It was the Marvin Gaye estate. It was one of the very few times I can remember a giant going after another giant in the business. Those cases normally are, David and Goliath, as you well know. And I'm not making a judgment on one way or the other. I'm just saying this particular one happened to be distinct in that particular arena. And the result was chilling. And as you've mentioned, there's 3 or 4 other cases that have come up that, the people being sued, have had the money, time, and energy and legal muscle to fight them. But yeah, it has created a chilling effect. It's almost as if we're saying we have to rewrite or rethink, the rules and the way that we've applied these rules over all these years to copyrights moving forward.
Agreed. But I think actually blurred lines is not even that insane to understand. Like, you can see both sides of that argument, but what followed that was feeding frenzy.
Yeah.
So it's not unnatural. It's kind of human nature. It happens in all fields where the pendulum swings dramatically in one direction. I mean, we're living it now politically, and then it'll swing back, and then it finds its level. But what I think that does is it gives voice to groups who, if they band together, like, they become a guild, or they become a production music association, or they become a music supervisors guild, like, all of a sudden you realize we're stronger together.
Right.
And that is great things come from that, because we start to recognize that we're not in an edit bay and we're not inside our headphones. We're actually part of a bigger culture, and there's a real fellowship in that. And that's why I never perceived the other catalogs I was competing against as a production music catalog as my enemies. They weren't someone to be beaten. They were people I looked to inspire me, Immediate Music and Audio Machine and even some of the much, much bigger catalogs who have since, whose stories have really usurped a lot of the independent boutique catalogs. But, I always saw them as like, come on, let's help each other. Let's make it so each other can continue. And that is primarily the attitude of our healthy competitors. And for me, I love it. I love getting up every day being a publisher. Like, I'll do it the rest of my life.
It's a great segue, because I want to ask you about your new company. You've launched a new company, and I'm wondering if you can tell our audience about it.
I have, and I'm so excited. It's ridiculous. I launched a company this year called Teragram Music, and it grew from the 2 decades that I primarily represented catalog for film and television. And whenever I would see a need, because I was down on the ground literally every day with a prospective user, and the end users calling me and seeing me and telling me and IMing me what they needed every day, and then those needs not necessarily being fulfilled because those catalogs I represented sort of saw themselves as doing just one thing and doing it well. And every time I would walk away from those conversations, I would say, well, but we can do this. I mean, we're essentially leaving money on the table, which is very important for being able to continue to function, as you know. But we're also not trying new things creatively, so why aren't we doing them? And I had so much respect for the catalogs I represented that I never wanted to go head-to-head with them. I always felt like my services agreement with those catalogs were supremely important, and I cherished them. But now that those are all done, I can let my freak flag fly. And we are really found that if I define myself at Teragram Music with an artist first, composer first point of view, that would set us apart. And that's what's driven me this year. We spent about 6 months setting up, and we selected about 8 composers who we either admired from afar or had done other work with, or who had come at me for years expressing an interest to do work with me because they saw the success I had with the other catalogs. And so I'm doing composer partnerships first. The first partnership I did as myself as Teragram is with a man named Darren Fung, who is really a renowned Canadian composer living in California, who just won the Canadian Film Award for music in his film called Equus. And he also happened to be a dad at preschool, which is so LA and
Right.
cracks me up. But we bonded very early on, not knowing we were in the same business. And almost a year into our friendship, realized that we had this in common. And the man is absolutely brilliant. And so I said, let's try this. Show me what you got already, and let's join forces. And it's been so collaborative. I've just replicated it. I did another deal with a man named Chris Stone, who's really made his bones as a music tech guy. He did all the sounds for Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and he's the sound of the Kit Car and Pete's Dragon.
Wow.
And he is, speaks 5 languages and was 5 when he was, in France, just doing all this classical work, and now lives in Los Angeles and works every day as a composer and music tech patents. And he's absolutely brilliant, and he thinks in musical melody. So I knew that with him, I could fulfill a certain need of epic drama that also had this musical sound design component. And then I've got a partnership with a guy who's an editor at Netflix. His name is Johnny O'Neill, and his partner, Albert Mata. They have Accidental Sound, and they are sound designers primarily, and they create layered sound that is melodic and is music. So we're trying to provide a much more diverse set of services through music that is not songs. And now we've also done some label partnerships. I did a partnership with Porterhouse Records, and I'm mining my relationships in Detroit, Michigan, as I'm married to the conscience of Detroit, I like to say, my husband Wayne. So we've got very deep relationships there, and there's a brilliant label run by a very young kid. It's called Jet Plastic Records, and he is an archival genius, and he's unearthing multi-tracks of music from Black Bottom. That's an indelible part of Detroit's history, which we will represent.
Great.
So, in Small Stone Records from Michigan, they've got 200 albums, and these people are hard-working label owners who understand that repping for placement is a job unto itself.
Yes, very, very much so. And what I love about what you're doing is you have found, as you mentioned earlier in our conversation, you have seen this particular world, explode. And, everyone and their mother having a library, everyone and their mother having, 150 songs, or, needing representation, the ability to make music. And what I love about listening to you about what Teragram is about is that you have identified a specific area of the business that's not necessarily being met by every other company. You're doing something and carving a niche that's needed, but that's curated, and that also broadens the scope of what we would call library, if, music representation is really about, yet also having things that haven't had representation in the past, like these libraries, these catalogs from Detroit, and unearthing very specific areas of the business.
Exactly. And that is what keeps me going. I have to enjoy it, and I really have to relate to the music. Even this synth music isn't necessarily my thing, and I was approached by our UK sub-publisher, a company called Ravenwood, who had 1,500 synth cues, and I was like, synth cues? I don't know. I kind of like guitars, and then they said, learn about synth. They sent me a cross section of what synth actually is, and I'm no longer a dummy. Like, I took every single one of those cues. They are so cool. They are the only UK catalog creating electronica and synth and ambient, 60s, 70s, 80s, Moog. It literally every kind of synth music known to man, every genre, every subgenre, they have it, and they have created it from the ground up. And I really tried to learn something because there's people out there who relate to that, and actually there's supervisors who need that. And the big irony is we've been tagging these cues because when we prep the material for delivery, we do it with such precision. And I love Brianna and JJ and Brett and William, who's my right-hand man here, who I would probably have a heart attack without because of the workload. I see them getting into this music, and they were born 25 years ago, and they're here, like they're learning about the theremin, and
Right.
They're learning about just crazy stuff that they never would have thought would have the possibility of life at sync, and they're describing it, and they're doing the keywords, and they're running it through SoundMiner, and then putting it up at Source Audio, and doing all these different formats of deliverables that are necessary, where all the labor is before you can even send a download link to anyone, and seeing them go through the discovery, again, for me, keeps me going. So there's something to this idea of absorbing something, learning it, and then being able to teach it to someone else. Then you really know it, right? Because you're teaching it to someone else.
Yeah, no, precisely.
Margaret, for our listeners out there, are there any great books, films, documentaries, anything that you could recommend to our listeners who are interested in becoming music supervisors?
Well, I would recommend first not to necessarily concern yourself with the label of music supervisor. The job of music supervisor has gone through a metamorphosis. Yeah. 15 years ago, when many people who had label jobs and found themselves without label jobs, or even, sort of mid-tier publishing jobs, they became music supervisors because they knew music and their intentions were good about being able to select songs. So what I would say is know what being a music supervisor is, and the best supervisors don't just take a movie and pick a song and make a selection and wash their hands of it and walk away to the next job. The best music supervisors, in my opinion, having worked as a producer on various things and hired supervisors for years, are those who know how to write a budget, how to execute a budget, and know how to find viable alts that they can clear in a brisk and unencumbered way. And the way you learn that is by actually learning about the business of music. Steve Winogradsky has a great book out. Read Don Passman's book. Yeah, exactly.
Steve
and my
was
old
teacher
lawyer.
at MI. Yeah, it's incredible.
Yeah, and I would say read Don Passman's book, but read the most recent version. Make sure that you're reading the work about the digital impact, and all these are all have been updated for our digital world, and they're both excellent and easy reads. They're enjoyable reads. Yeah. The Braybecks have vital information. Get a little bit from everybody. Get it where you can get it, and ask for help.
Margaret, I want to ask you, I guess, kind of the same question for composers and writers and so forth who are interested in getting their music placed. Are there any specific do's and don'ts or ideas that you have that you feel can be helpful to them?
Are you talking about a composer who, for example, wants to have a job on a series, or a composer who wants their catalog to be represented by a third party?
Probably all of the above, and also an artist that's trying to maybe get their song placed. I mean, what would be the do's and don'ts that, in all of those maybe scenarios?
Well, first do for anyone is if you have a collection of works, if you have a repertoire that you've built up enough to where you feel like it's enough to package and market on its own, find one entity. So that goes back to, don't date 50 people.
Right.
Find someone you can relate to, who understands what you're making, who has a track record of very deep and very healthy relationships with the end user. And if you can't find someone to do that for you, to take on your catalog. Try to build a relationship with a producer or a director who's just turning the corner, who really doesn't have a separate mattress full of money to pay you for that, but who you're building a relationship with. So if you want to be a composer for a living, apprentice for a composer, and do it with a completely open mind and without ego and attitude. Go at this stuff with a mind of service, because what you'll get back is tenfold.
Yeah, it's so interesting, in listening to you, this is what Hans Zimmer has set up a whole model of. And I remember an interview once with him where he talked about how did he start, how did he get his break? And he said exactly what you just said. He said, early in my career, one of the things that I did, I made friends with all of the filmmakers who were starting out at film school. And he said, and I did a lot of their projects. I became versed, with that world and did a lot of work for them. And he said, as it would have it, I did a lot of stuff like that for free. But he said, as it would have it, my break came from one of these filmmakers. He didn't mention the name, but he said one of these filmmakers had the opportunity, or somehow the fates had it, that Barry Levinson saw the filmmaker's movie and said to him, who was the person who did the score? And he said it was this young composer named Hans Zimmer. And he hired him to do a picture he was making at the time called Rain Man. And he said, that was my big break. He said, that he saw that work that I had been doing for, all of these different film composers, all of these different filmmakers that I had developed relationships with, saw that work and hired me on the basis of seeing that work. He liked my ideas, my compositional sense, all of that, but it was right to the point that you were making. And, and to this day, Hans has that enormous operation in Santa Monica that he runs, and does the same thing, brings it in. It's like he's paid it forward. He brings in other composers. He, sets them up, and many people have come out of that. So it's a very interesting point that you're making, and I wanted to add that story because I think he's one of the top people, and there you have proof of exactly what you're saying with a living, example. No
question. I believe it drives all the best decisions, and that is really a longing to learn. And Wayne being 20 years older than me and having lived the 1,000 lives he's lived, and still having this legacy to curate, but him being more concerned himself with what the next thing is. I often hear him tell young musicians who come to see him for various reasons. He says, "Why are you doing this? Are you doing it because you want to, or because you have an idea that this job description called rock star exists out there?" And then invariably he will bring them to his computer and go to the bureau, Census Bureau, and go to the jobs list and tells them to find on the list rock star. Where does it list rock star as a job description?
Yeah, right.
and they turn back at him, and he says, "Yeah, it doesn't say rock star anywhere, does it? Because that's not a job."
Exactly.
And this is often, where we land. We come full circle. It's do what you do because you want to do it. Because if you don't want to do it, you will get tired of it. And I think, when I moved here at 29 from Cleveland, Ohio, I knew one thing, and it was that I didn't want some dumbass breathing down my neck, that I would be the dumbass breathing down my neck if there was going to be one. And decision I made from that moment forward drove my desire to run my own business. And it's because I wanted to. So, 22 years later, here we are.
Margaret, I can't thank you enough for taking the time to speak with us and to do this today. We both really appreciate you doing it. Thank you.
Oh, it's really my pleasure. We'll do it again. And before we sign off, I have to tell you, Ritch, my brother George Saadi sends his best regards to you.
Oh, well, thank you. Please give my best to George as well. Thank you so much.
Yeah, he's a great inspiration for me, a music business survivor. So I will send him your best.
Oh, please. That's so wonderful to hear. Thank you. Wow, really, really interesting material here.
Yeah.
And not in the way that, we got from other music supervisors. She talked about a lot of interesting things in this particular piece. How viable, I thought one of the more interesting things is at the top of the interview when she talked about how viable, is your content that you're creating. If it's just generic stuff, folks, you are in for a lot of competition with that. Everybody's doing that.
Right.
And how she talked about, the distinct and unique stuff, and that really pertains to, if you're going to be a supervisor looking for things, having a catalog and understanding the criteria of who you do business with.
Right.
You can't say yes to everything. You can't say, I'm just going to take a song for the sake of a song. The other thing that is interesting is that in this particular field, which I'm fairly versed in because of my work with the Film and Television Music Guide, is that certain libraries do very, very well because they offer specific things.
Right.
This idea of being a generalist.
Right.
Everybody's a generalist
they provide
today.
a niche.
Yeah, like extreme music.
Right.
They offer extreme forms of music in all forms.
Right.
Extreme rock, extreme punk, extreme, instrumental,
Right.
overseas, international music, things that are not the norm. So that I thought was an interesting premise.
Yeah. She talked about how the numbers, as far as sourcing music, how the numbers of catalogs have just grown exponentially.
Yes. So much out there.
Right.
That's the thing. So much competition, so much noise.
And the business with previous composers and, their work ethic and creating these custom scores, again, getting back to not being a generalist, but being a very niche oriented thing. And, Margaret's obviously has a unique position because she owns a catalog, one of the most, probably prominent ones with the MC5 catalog.
Right.
And so it's just very interesting from her perspective. And, I thought one of the other interesting things that she talked about, which were, the best ways on getting on her radar or just in general of a music supervisor, but I think in her estimation was, something where she's not getting something like an email that just came in that she's going to unsubscribe to. And I guess one of the things that she talked about was, the stuff that's going on with, which I thought was fascinating because it's true, where there's a lot of this fan-driven content where
Yes.
they're getting these hits from their DSP saying, hey, this copyright is being used. And when they go and check it out and seeing what types of music, what songs are they using from their catalog and why and how.
Yes.
And I thought that was really interesting.
Absolutely. And, the point of she's not looking at it from like, oh, I have to go after and sue them.
Exactly.
It's looking at, the ad rev thing, picking that up and saying, this is what's being done.
Well, they're making money off of it anyway. So, I mean,
Exactly. But
so,
the technology exists now to do that,
correct.
which is great.
Yeah.
But her point was how interesting I can look and see how my catalog, how my cues, how my specific music is being used in this particular way by a fan, or what things they've picked up, or how they've resourced, meaning taken what you have maybe that was in a trailer or something and reused it in a new, unique way. Also, the other thing, Eric, that I thought was fascinating is that her sense of getting on her radar, so much of it was on social media.
Right.
How that, going
seeing
where
a
the
piece of
audience,
music with the video and how that, kind of resonated with her. And to the
Absolutely.
point where they've started to do it on their own, where they're getting their content and they're putting it and kind of taking those ideas that they're seeing from the fan-driven content and repurposing it and making new things out of that for themselves with their catalog.
Right. And how, things on Instagram or things on Facebook or YouTube, that she discovers and sees that. And that's, one of the ways to get on her radar. So I thought that was a very interesting thing that I hadn't heard before from other people.
Yeah. And, when it talked about one of the challenging aspects of, her job today was, filtering through the volume.
Yes, that's everybody's challenge today. It's our challenge as people with music. It's our challenge with email. It's our challenge with, so much as Lefsetz calls it, the tsunami of stuff that comes at us every day.
Every day.
I mean, if you look at it from your own perspectives, ladies and gentlemen, from the moment your eyes open in the morning until they shut at night, how many times is a husband, a wife, a boyfriend, a girlfriend, a brother, a sister, a boss, a a coworker, a relative, an email, a text message, a billboard, a website, something, somewhere coming at you and demanding your attention. And how many things do you give it to and for how long?
Right.
And you begin to see, how this tsunami, like how many things
The
can you
deluge.
can you pay attention to?
Yeah.
And how important that is.
And I thought one of the other interesting points was that she said that she wasn't worried about missing things anymore. At first she was downloading everything into her hard drive because she felt she can't, she had to do it. And then it was just like, it's just too much.
You can't do that
You can't.
today.
You cannot.
We're no longer in the era. You got to let go of that thing of like, I might miss something. I talk about this a lot with coworkers in the music industry where, if you've been in it long enough, you remember an era when you could keep up. You could keep up with what was out. You could go to Tower 3 times a week, check new things out, when new releases came in and so forth. And you could keep abreast if you were in the business. I don't know anyone today, I don't care who you are or how diligent you are, who actually can do that. I mean, I was laughing the other day with somebody who's been in the business a long time, and we were saying, I said, I'm on Pitchfork's email list, and I get these like absurd emails every 7 albums you need to hear this week.
Right.
And I'm thinking, 7 albums I need to hear this week? I don't have time for 7 songs, let alone 7. Where am I going to find time for 7 albums? And this is all indicative of the same, this is not a music discussion, ladies and gentlemen. This is a problem in our culture. It's the problem in TV. It's the problem in books. It's the problem in music. It's the problem on the internet. It's this
floodgates are just opened.
And so where are you going to put your time and energy?
Exactly. And also one of the other things was the concerns about litigation in this subject, about all the litigation that's come up out of these things and, being careful with what it is that you are taking on because of the litigation problems.
And that's an age-old problem where the legalities of a lot of the technological advances we've had in the business haven't caught up with the realities.
Yeah. And then the final point, which was, talking about advice to those wanting to pursue a career as a music supervisor. And I guess, she was talking about getting that collection of works together, and finding someone that you can relate to as opposed to just trying to shotgun everything to everybody, trying to find somebody. And I thought one of the most important points that she talked about, which I think is the better route to go, is to build a relationship with an upcoming producer, director that's, up and coming that you can kind of get into and get involved with from those points. And I think Hans Zimmer was a perfect example of that.
Yes, well, Hans Zimmer was. Hans Zimmer is one of the foremost composers in the business. Used to make all of his relationships, early in his career with student filmmakers, before he became famous. And he would work on their projects and work on them and do scores and so forth. And these are the people that, he's built relationships with. One of those films that he did happened to be seen by Barry Levinson. This was like in 1988. And Barry loved the film, but said to the director, who did the score? It's a very interesting score. I want to talk to this guy. So he said this guy named Hans Zimmer did it. He introduced him to Hans Zimmer, and Barry Levinson hired him to do his next picture, which was Rain Man. A very, very successful film in 1989 with Dustin Hoffman, Tom Cruise, an Academy Award winner for Best Picture, lots of accolades. And it launched Hans's career in the big leagues. And he's never looked back since. But that's how he did it. Other examples on the music supervision side would be like Mary Ramos and her relationship with Quentin Tarantino, which goes back to, Reservoir Dogs.
Reservoir Dogs, 2 decades.
Exactly.
Decades plus.
So right to your point of developing a relationship with, up-and-coming filmmakers who you really have an affinity for.
Yeah.
That's absolutely crucial.
Hey, Insiders, thanks so much for tuning into this episode. We really appreciate it. To get show notes, links, and everything that was mentioned during this interview, head on over to our official website at MUBUTV.com/podcast/show notes. If you're enjoying the content and what we're doing here on the show, please subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcast, Stitcher, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts from. And don't forget to rate rate and review our show over at iTunes. 5-star reviews are always welcome and help to ensure that our podcast stands out on the top-rated and new and noteworthy charts on iTunes in our space. You can also find us on social media at Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, all ending with the handle MUBUTV, which is spelled MUBUTV. Don't forget to catch our flagship show, the MUBUTV Insider Video Series, airing every week on YouTube at youtube.com/MUBUTV. This show was produced and created by Ritch, Esra, and Eric Knight. This show would not be here if it weren't for our amazing team, which are the following: interview editors Sarah Nissenbaum and Alex Taylor. Show notes and transcriptions by Jani Chang, Nicole Capodoglo, Lilia Owens, and Sarah Nissenbaum. Theme music by Disciples of Babylon. And be sure to tune in next week for another episode of the MUBUTV Insider Podcast.